Disney's Moana, Chapter 13. Warm sunlight on her eyelids woke Moana the next day. Stretching, she poked her head up over the hull, an excited thrill running through her at the sight of land ahead. Rising out of the ocean was an island so green and beautiful it had to be Tahiti. "We're here? Maui? Told you I could do it!" Moana spun to find Maui asleep at the helm, snoring softly. Turning back around, she watched the island get closer, the tall cliffs looking familiar. Was that a reef circling the island as well? Motunui. But I'm home? Moana stared in confusion. It wasn't time to go home yet. They had to restore the heart first. To her horror, the green mountaintops of her island began to blacken, and then, as though rivulets of ink were spilling down over the rocks from above, the plants below withered. Even from the distance, Moana could smell the stench of the rotting plants, the acid tang burning the inside of her nose. "Moana!" Her father and mother stood on the shore, waving their arms over their heads. Their faces were pained, and there was an edge of panic in her father's voice. Behind them, the forest was shriveling so fast it looked like a tidal wave crashing toward the sand. "Dad! Mom!" Moana cried. She gripped the side of the boat, her heart lurching. She had to help them. She had to save her home. "Help, Moana! Moana!" her mother called. Gasping, Moana bolted upright, her eyes blinking in the bright daylight. Looking down, she realized her hands were empty. No hull clutched in her palms, no oar or ropes either. "Enjoy your beauty rest?" Maui asked mockingly. "A real wayfinder never sleeps, so they actually get where they need to go." Evidently, the demigod had recovered from the dart and had taken over when she'd fallen asleep. Moana felt a pang of guilt. She was failing her ancestors. But then again, she had known that rule, and it had been a long couple of days. Still, she vowed to herself to stay awake next time. At least her nightmare hadn't been real. She sat up, trying to shake off the lingering feeling that something awful was happening back home. She had to believe she still had a chance to save Motunui. "Muscle up, Buttercup. We're here." Following the direction of his nod, Moana turned to see a ring of fog hovering over the ocean. Bursting through it was a huge rock spire more than 1,000 feet tall. When they got closer, Moana had to crane her neck to see the top, but even that disappeared as Maui piloted them through the fog. Kerthunk! The bottom of the canoe bumped into the rock-strewn beach at the base of the spire. As Maui tethered the boat to a rock, Moana wandered closer to the cliffside. In its shadow, she found a withered tree, its bark completely black, as though it had been poisoned. Shivering, Moana fingered her necklace. That could be Motunui, she thought, remembering the decaying vines outside the cavern of boats and the horrible images from her dream. But not if she and Maui restored the heart in time. She hoped locating Maui's fishhook wouldn't take long. "You sure this guy's going to have your hook?" Moana asked, eyeing the cliff. Who would live at the top of a rock spire that high? Was there anything growing up there, or did he have to come down every day to eat? She couldn't imagine making that climb every day, but then maybe he could fly. Tamatoa? He'll have it. He's a scavenger. Collects stuff. Thinks it makes him look cool. Moana turned to see Maui sprinkling some food out for Heihei. Aw, that's sweet, she thought. Then the demigod ruined it, pantomiming to the rooster that he should eat up so that then Maui could eat him. Stepping in between them, Moana shook her head at Maui. Pest or not, her rooster was not on the menu. Of course, Heihei cluelessly began pecking at the food. Maui shrugged, then strode over to examine the cliff face, whistling to himself. And he lives up there? Moana said as she joined him. What? The demigod chuckled in amusement as though she'd made a joke. Oh no, that's just the entrance to Lalatai. Lalatai? Moana felt the blood drain out of her face in shock. Her grandmother had told her stories of that place. The realm of monsters? We're going to the realm of monsters? Maui's tone had been so casual, like it was an everyday thing to venture into a land populated by the biggest, scariest monsters around. Then again, maybe that was an everyday thing for him. We? No, me. You're going to stay here with the other chicken. Maui nodded toward Heihei, then grinned at Moana. Begak! He crowed, flapping his arms. That's what I'm talking about. Gimme some! He held up his palm to Mini Maui, but the ink guy just stared at him. Moana's eyes narrowed. She was no coward. Hadn't she already proven herself by voyaging beyond the reef and in the battle against the Kakamora? No, if it involved Maui and getting the heart back to Te Fiti, she was going to be a part of it, no matter how daunting the task. Nothing? Maui asked his tattoo self. That was a good one. How do you not get it? I called her a chicken. There's a chicken on the boat. I know she's human, but she's not that... Oh, forget it. I'm not explaining it to you, because then it's not funny. Shrugging at Mini Maui, the demigod turned without even glancing at Moana, so her glare was completely wasted, and began to climb up the cliff, his long arms carrying him out of conversational range alarmingly fast. The spire seemed impossibly high. She hoped the rock wasn't slippery. Casting a glance at the dead tree, Moana reminded herself that her people were counting on her, that the ocean needed her help to stop the spreading darkness. She clutched her necklace and prayed for luck, both from the heart and from her grandmother's spirit. Then she stepped up onto a boulder, stretching her arms as high as they could go to grab the next handhold, and pushed off with her feet. I can do it, she told herself. Breathe, reach, pull, breathe. After about 30 minutes of grueling climbing, she caught up to Maui, who was taking a rest break. When he saw her, he muttered something about idiotic mortals and started upward again. But this time she was able to keep him within sight and within earshot. Do you have to breathe so loudly? He complained as she panted below him. We can't all be demigods, she gasped out. Then she had to save her breath for climbing, since she was using twice as many hand and footholds as Maui. An hour later, Maui paused on a ledge and she drew level with him again. Hauling herself up onto the platform, Moana wobbled slightly, then quickly recovered, scanning the rock for her next hold. She could feel his eyes on her as she scrambled onto a boulder and shook out her hands. So, daughter of the chief, Maui began, I thought you stayed in the village kissing babies. Maui shot him a look, wondering where the demigod was going with this line of logic. I'm just trying to understand why your people decided to send... How do I phrase this? Maui tapped on his chin. You? My people didn't send me. The ocean did, she said, reaching up on tiptoes toward the next overhanging ledge. Right, the ocean. Makes sense. You're, 8? Can't sail? It's the obvious choice. Maui stood and walked over to the boulder, his head at the same height as her waist, although she didn't for a second think he was there to give her a boost. It chose me for a reason, she said confidently. Pushing off with her feet, Moana jumped up and wrapped her fingers around the edge. That you're expendable? Maui scaled the cliff to hang next to her. Seeing her annoyance, he chuckled. I found your island, Moana pointed out proudly. If it weren't for her, he'd still be marooned there. The ocean dumped you on my island, Curly, Maui retorted. He dropped down to the ledge and dusted off his hands. And if it's so smart, why didn't it just take the heart back to Te Fiti itself? Or bring me my hook? Ocean's a nut job, trust me. BFFs one day, stranding you on a whale turd sandbar the next. Maui shouted the last part out at the ocean itself. Turning back to her, the demigod met her eyes squarely. Ocean's kooky dukes, he said simply. Hundreds of feet below her, the waves crashed against the shore, their movements looking chaotic and frenzied rather than calm and purposeful. But I'm sure it's not wrong about you, right? Maui's voice was mocking and came from right next to her. One of his hands cupped the bottom of her foot, and he hoisted her up onto the next ledge in a smooth, effortless move. You're the chosen one. Doubt crept into Moana's mind as she climbed higher. Why had the ocean chosen her, and not someone older, stronger? Someone who could sail like her father? The thought of her father and their last conversation only made her feel worse. But soon she would help Maui restore the heart and help her people by doing so. All because the ocean believed she was the right person for the job. Right? Ah! Moana nearly missed a handhold. Focus, she told herself. There's no point in worrying about the ocean's choice now. One thing at a time. And the one thing right then was to make it up the spire. What felt like years later, Moana pulled herself up at the top, collapsing on the rock. But as her heartbeat slowed and she shook out her muscles, her gaze fell on the Circulean seascape before her. Spread out like an endless topicloth around the island, the ocean rippled in every direction for as far as she could see, which, since she was at the top of an insanely high cliff, one that was even higher than the tallest mountain peak in Montanui, was a very, very long way. It wasn't just blue. It was aqua and sapphire and navy, emerald and lime green, topped with curling white bubbles and interrupted only by the gray outlines of whales. The view was so incredible. She wasn't sure she'd be able to describe it to anyone back home. Nobody, not even her father, had ever witnessed just how immense and powerful the ocean was beyond their shores. Of everyone in the village, the sea had sought her out. The ocean chose you for a reason, she whispered to herself. If you start singing, I'm going to throw up. Maui's voice broke the bubble of serenity in Moana's chest. Right, they had a monster land to infiltrate. Turning, she found Maui heaving himself over the edge to join her. Beyond him, all she could see on the summit were jumbles of rocks, and more rocks. So, entrance. not seeing an entrance, she said. Could Maui be wrong about the location? Because it only appears after a human sacrifice, he said, his expression ominous. Moana backpedaled a few steps, eyes darting around in search of an escape route. Was that what he'd meant when he said she was expendable? Then Maui started laughing. Kidding, he said. Moana glared at him. So serious, he teased. Rolling his eyes at her, Maui shook himself out, then launched into a battle dance, flashing his warrior face. Crack! His massive fist pounded into the ground and it splintered, the jagged lines forming a face in the rock. Where the mouth would be, a hole opened, and far, far below it, Moana saw a spinning vortex appear in the ocean, its center a black, fathomless pit. His eyes full of laughter, Maui nudged her with his elbow. Don't worry, it's a lot farther down than it looks, he said. Then, with a running leap, he flung himself off the platform toward the water below, shouting, Gee-hoo! Diving gracefully, Maui did a series of flips and somersaults, clearly enjoying himself. I'm still falling, he called up. As she peered over the edge, Moana felt her stomach roll. Maui's tiny figure disappeared into the swirling maelstrom below, and Moana desperately tried to master her queasiness. For some reason, her muscles weren't listening to her. They seemed to be frozen in place. You can do this. Jump, she told herself. Then, as she saw the portal beginning to shrink, she realized she couldn't wait any longer. Go, she yelled, jolting her legs into action. Pebbles skittered over the edge alongside her. Yee! She shrieked as she plummeted toward the vortex. What had she been thinking? All her instincts were screaming at her that she'd just made a terrible mistake. But it was too late. No way to go but down.